8,000 years ago, as the first light of morning slowly spread across the wetlands of what we now call Florida, a family stood silently beside a dark and motionless pond. The air was heavy with humidity. Water birds drifted across the marsh. Tall grasses swayed gently in the distance. In the center of the gathering stood a young woman wrapped carefully in woven fabric made by hands that loved her. Around her, children watched quietly. Elders lowered their heads. A husband struggled to hold back tears. One final time, they touched her face. One final time, they spoke words that would never be heard again. Then, with extraordinary care, they carried her into the shallow water and lowered her beneath the surface. Ripples spread across the pond and slowly disappeared. The family returned home believing they had said goodbye forever. They could never have imagined that thousands of years later, their final act of love would become one of the most astonishing archaeological discoveries in American history. For centuries, generation after generation returned to the same pond. Mothers were laid to rest there. Fathers followed. Children, grandparents, hunters, gatherers, and respected elders all joined those who had gone before them beneath the dark waters. The pond became more than a burial place. It became a bridge between the living and the dead, a sacred landscape where memory and tradition endured across countless lifetimes. Seasons changed. Floods came and went. Entire generations vanished. Yet the pond remained, quiet, undisturbed, watching the centuries pass in silence. As time moved forward, the world around the pond transformed beyond recognition. Forests expanded and retreated. Animals migrated. New cultures emerged. Thousands of years passed. Great civilizations rose and fell across distant continents. Empires appeared and vanished into history. Yet the people resting beneath the waters of this forgotten pond remained untouched. Hidden beneath layers of peat and sediment, they waded through ages that seemed almost impossible to comprehend. Then, in 1982, something unexpected happened. Near the modern city of Titusville, construction crews began preparing land for a housing development. To the workers, it appeared to be another ordinary project. The landscape showed no obvious signs that anything remarkable lay beneath the ground. Bulldozers moved across the site. Earth was cleared. Work progressed normally. But as excavation continued, strange shapes began appearing in the dark soil. At first, nobody fully understood what they were seeing. A closer look revealed something extraordinary. Human remains. Archaeologists were quickly called to investigate. They expected a small burial site, perhaps a handful of ancient graves. What they found instead left them stunned. More remains appeared, then more, then dozens more. Each discovery raised new questions. The site seemed far older than anyone anticipated. The burials were unlike those found elsewhere in North America. The bodies had not been placed in dry graves. They had been carefully positioned beneath what had once been the bottom of a pond. As excavations expanded, researchers realized they were standing at the edge of something that could transform the understanding of America's distant past. The site would eventually become known as Windover Pond, and what emerged from its dark soil would challenge assumptions that had existed for generations. Archaeologists uncovered the remains of more than 100 individuals, representing men, women, and children from a community that had lived nearly 8,000 years ago. Yet the greatest surprises had not even been discovered. The peat at the bottom of the pond had created an environment unlike almost any other. Oxygen levels remained extremely low. Decay slowed dramatically. Materials that should have disappeared thousands of years earlier somehow survived. Researchers began finding woven textiles of astonishing complexity. Delicate fibers remained intact. Carefully crafted fabrics revealed a level of skill and craftsmanship that many experts had not expected to see from such an ancient society. These were not crude materials made without thought. They reflected knowledge passed down through generations, evidence of creativity, patience, and remarkable technical ability. Then came a discovery that sounded almost impossible. Within several skulls, researchers identified preserved human brain tissue. Even experienced scientists struggled to believe what they were seeing. Human brains rarely survive even a fraction of that length of time. Yet here, buried beneath a Florida pond for thousands of years, traces remained. The discovery attracted international attention. Laboratories conducted extensive testing. Experts searched for explanations. How could such fragile material survive for so long? What conditions had protected it? And more importantly, what secrets might it still contain? Suddenly, Windover was no longer simply an archaeological site. It had become a mystery. Every artifact raised new questions. Every burial offered another clue. The people who rested beneath the pond seemed determined to tell their story, but only one piece at a time. Researchers began reconstructing lives that had ended thousands of years earlier. They examined bones, textiles, tools, and preserved biological material. Slowly, a picture emerged of a society far more sophisticated than many had imagined. The ancient people of Windover were not wandering aimlessly through a harsh wilderness. They understood their environment intimately. They knew the seasonal rhythms of the wetlands. They developed techniques for gathering food, crafting tools, weaving fabrics, and caring for their communities. Evidence suggested strong social bonds and traditions that endured across generations. The pond itself appeared to hold deep cultural significance. It was chosen deliberately. Again and again, families returned to the same sacred place, trusting it to protect those they loved. But many questions remain unanswered even today. Why was water chosen as the final resting place? What beliefs guided these burial rituals? How did this community develop such advanced textile skills so early in human history? And how many other stories remain hidden beneath the landscapes of North America, waiting for discovery? Tonight, we will follow the clues left behind by the people of Windover. We will explore the ancient world they inhabited, the remarkable discoveries made beneath the waters of a forgotten pond, and the scientific mysteries that continue to fascinate researchers decades after the site was uncovered. Together, we will uncover a story of family, tradition, survival, and innovation stretching back 8,000 years into the distant past. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because the deeper archaeologists looked into Windover Pond, the stranger the story became. What began as a routine construction project was about to reveal evidence that would challenge long-held beliefs about the earliest peoples of North America. Hidden beneath layers of peat and still water were clues that had waited 8,000 years to be found. And as researchers would soon discover, the pond was only beginning to share its secrets. In the spring of 1982, nobody expected history to be waiting beneath the soil outside Titusville, Florida. The area appeared ordinary enough. New homes were planned. Surveyors had completed their work. Construction crews arrived with heavy equipment and began preparing the land for development. To everyone involved, it looked like another routine project in a rapidly growing part of the state. The wetlands surrounding the site had long been viewed as undeveloped ground, valuable primarily for what might eventually be built there. Yet beneath the surface rested a chapter of American history that had remained hidden for nearly 8,000 years. As machinery cleared portions of the land, workers noticed unusual dark patches beneath the soil. At first, there seemed to be little reason for concern. Florida's landscape often presents layers of organic material, especially in former wetland environments. But then something caught their attention. Shapes emerged that appeared different from the surrounding earth. Some workers later recalled feeling that they were looking at something man-made, though none could have guessed the true age of what lay below. Work slowed as questions began to circulate among the crew. The discovery of human bones changed everything. Construction activity halted in the immediate area while specialists were contacted. Archaeologists arrived expecting to examine what might be a small historic cemetery or perhaps an isolated burial. Such discoveries occasionally occurred during development projects, and experienced researchers approached the site cautiously. Their initial goal was simple: determine the age of the remains and assess whether further excavation would be necessary. The first skeleton appeared remarkably well preserved considering its apparent age. Then another burial was identified nearby. Soon a pattern began to emerge. What seemed like a single grave was actually part of something much larger. Excavation units expanded outward. Careful measurements were taken. Layers of peat and sediment were removed inch by inch. As archaeologists worked through the ancient deposits, additional burials continued to appear. 1 became 5. 5 became 10. 10 became 20. The numbers kept growing. What had begun as a routine investigation rapidly transformed into one of the most important archaeological excavations in North America. Researchers soon realized they were not dealing with scattered burials placed randomly across the landscape. The individuals had been carefully arranged. Many appeared positioned in similar ways. Several had been placed within what had once been the bottom of a pond. The realization immediately raised difficult questions. Why would an ancient community repeatedly return to the same body of water to bury their dead? What significance had this location held? And how had these burials remained hidden for so many thousands of years? As excavation continued, the ancient pond itself slowly revealed its outline. Long before modern Florida looked the way it does today, this had been a shallow body of water surrounded by wetlands rich with life. It was here that generations of families had gathered to say farewell to their loved ones. The same scene described in oral imagination countless times. A grieving husband, a mourning mother, silent children watching from the shoreline, had unfolded repeatedly across centuries. Now, for the first time in 8,000 years, evidence of those moments was emerging into daylight. The archaeological team worked with extraordinary care. Every fragment was documented. Every burial was mapped. The deeper they excavated, the more remarkable the site became. Researchers identified men and women of various ages. Children rested beside adults. Entire generations appeared represented within the pond's boundaries. It was becoming clear that this location had served as a sacred burial place for hundreds of years, perhaps even longer. Yet despite the growing significance of the discovery, many experts still believed they understood what they were looking at. An ancient cemetery. Important, certainly. Rare, without question. But ultimately a burial ground. That assumption would soon be challenged. As laboratory analysis began and excavation expanded further, unusual details started appearing. Organic materials that should have vanished thousands of years earlier remained surprisingly intact. Fragments of woven fabric emerged from the peat. Wooden artifacts survived in conditions where they should have decayed completely. Even seasoned archaeologists struggled to explain the level of preservation they were witnessing. The pond seemed to have protected its contents with remarkable efficiency. Questions multiplied. How could delicate fibers survive for 8,000 years? Why were certain materials preserved while others were not? What unique conditions existed beneath the ancient pond? The answers remained elusive. Meanwhile, news of the excavation began spreading through the archaeological community. Researchers from across the country followed developments closely. Many recognized that Windover Pond, as the site would soon become known, might provide an unprecedented glimpse into a period of North American history that remained poorly understood. Most archaeological sites from this era offered only fragments of information. Windover appeared ready to offer something far more complete. Then came discoveries that nobody had anticipated. Scientists examining the remains noticed preservation unlike anything they had encountered before. Certain biological materials appeared to have survived in ways previously considered impossible. Laboratory tests were ordered. Additional analyses followed. The results left researchers astonished. The ancient pond was holding secrets far beyond a collection of burials. What archaeologists initially believed to be an ordinary cemetery was rapidly becoming one of the most extraordinary scientific mysteries ever uncovered in the United States. And beneath the dark layers of peat, the most shocking discoveries were still waiting to be found. To understand the mystery of Windover Pond, we must first leave behind the modern world and travel back to a Florida that no longer exists. Long before highways crossed the state, before cities lined the coastline, and thousands of years before the first Europeans reached North America, the landscape surrounding Windover was a place of immense natural richness. It was a world shaped by water, seasons, and ancient ecosystems that supported human communities for generations beyond counting. 8,000 years ago, Florida looked both familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Vast wetlands stretched across the horizon. Shallow ponds reflected the sky like mirrors. Dense forests stood beside open marshes. Rivers wound through the landscape, creating corridors of life that connected people, animals, and resources across great distances. The climate was warmer than many regions farther north, offering year-round opportunities for hunting, gathering, fishing, and travel. Unlike the harsh environments often associated with early human survival, This was a land capable of providing abundance to those who understood its rhythms. Many people imagine ancient societies constantly struggling against nature, spending every waking moment searching for food and shelter. It is an image that has appeared in textbooks, documentaries, and popular culture for decades. Yet discoveries at Windover Pond suggest a far more complex reality. The people who lived here were not simply surviving. They were thriving. They knew when fish would gather in certain waters. They knew which plants could be harvested during each season. They knew where animals traveled and where resources could be found during times of drought or flood. They understood the landscape in ways modern people rarely understand the environments around them. Every season brought opportunities. Every change in weather carried meaning. Every movement within the wetlands could provide valuable information. The people of Windover lived within a vast network of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Children learned from parents. Skills were refined over centuries. Observations became traditions. Traditions became culture. The result was a society deeply connected to the natural world surrounding it. When the first families gathered beside Windover Pond to bury their loved ones, they were already part of a long tradition of adaptation and understanding. They knew the wetlands intimately. They understood the behavior of birds crossing seasonal migration routes. They recognized the flowering patterns of plants. They tracked the movement of fish through waterways and observed subtle changes in water levels that signaled shifts in weather. Their knowledge was not written in books. It existed in memory, experience, and oral traditions passed carefully from elder to child. The wildlife surrounding ancient Windover would have been extraordinary. White-tailed deer moved through forests and grasslands. Turtles basked along waterways. Fish filled ponds and streams. Countless species of birds migrated through the region each year, transforming the sky with seasonal movement. Predators stalked the wetlands, while smaller animals thrived among dense vegetation. Every corner of the landscape contributed to a living system that supported human life. Even the distant memory of an earlier world lingered in the environment. Thousands of years before the people of Windover lived beside their sacred pond, enormous Ice Age animals had roamed parts of Florida. Mammoths and mastodons had once crossed these lands. Though many of those giant creatures had disappeared long before the Windover community emerged, their legacy remained part of a changing landscape that humans continued to adapt to over countless generations. For the people living near Windover Pond, the environment was more than a source of food. It shaped every aspect of daily life. Waterways served as transportation routes. Wetlands provided materials for tools and weaving. Forests offered shelter and fuel. The natural world was woven into their beliefs, traditions, and understanding of existence itself. When they buried their dead beneath the waters of the pond, they may have been expressing ideas about life, death, memory, and renewal that are difficult for us to fully understand today. What is clear, however, is that these communities possessed remarkable skill and organization. They survived in the region for centuries. They raised families. They developed technologies suited to their environment. They maintained cultural traditions across generations. The evidence emerging from Windover Pond suggests a stable and successful way of life that endured for a very long time. And yet, despite their achievements, most people have never heard of them. Their names are lost. Their language is gone. Their stories were never written down. Unlike the great civilizations of Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, or Rome, the people of Windover left no monuments towering above the landscape. They built no stone pyramids. They left behind no written records describing their beliefs or daily experiences. Instead, their history remained hidden beneath water, peat, and centuries of silence. This creates one of the greatest mysteries surrounding Windover Pond. If these people were so knowledgeable, if they understood their environment so completely, if they possessed traditions sophisticated enough to endure across generations, why do we know so little about them today? The answer lies partly in the fragile nature of human memory. Most ancient communities disappear without leaving substantial traces behind. Homes decay. Wooden tools rot away. Clothing vanishes. Entire lifetimes can disappear from history within a few generations. Usually, archaeologists are left with scattered fragments and incomplete clues. But Windover was different. The pond preserved what time normally destroys. And because of that preservation, Researchers were about to discover evidence that would challenge long-standing assumptions about the earliest peoples of North America. What they found next would reveal that the community resting beneath the waters of Windover Pond possessed skills and traditions far beyond what many experts once believed possible. As archaeologists continued their work at Windover Pond, a remarkable realization began to take shape. The individuals emerging from the dark peat were no longer simply ancient remains cataloged by age and location. Slowly, burial by burial, a forgotten community began to reappear. The distance of 8,000 years started to fade. What remained were human lives that felt surprisingly familiar. It is easy to look at ancient history and see only dates, artifacts, and skeletons. Yet every individual resting beneath Windover Pond had once laughed around a fire, worried about family members, celebrated births, mourned losses, and watched the changing seasons pass across the wetlands. They were not mysterious figures living in some distant world beyond recognition. In many ways, they experienced the same emotions that define human life today. Imagine a quiet evening beside the pond. The sun sinks below the horizon as families gather near their shelters. Children chase one another through tall grasses while elders share stories remembered from generations before. Meals are prepared using knowledge accumulated over centuries. Nearby, skilled hands work patiently with plant fibers, transforming raw materials into tools, containers, and woven fabrics. The sounds of birds echo across the water as darkness slowly settles over the wetlands. For the people of Windover, scenes like this were part of everyday life. Archaeological evidence suggests these communities were organized around strong family connections. Parents taught children essential survival skills from an early age. Young boys and girls learned where to find edible plants, how to recognize changing weather patterns, and how to navigate the waterways that connected different parts of their world. Knowledge was not acquired through books or schools. It was shared through observation, experience, and countless conversations between generations. Mothers played a vital role in preserving traditions and caring for families. Fathers contributed their own skills and knowledge, helping secure food and resources while teaching practical abilities that children would carry throughout their lives. Grandparents served as living libraries, preserving memories and wisdom that stretched back through decades of experience. Every member of the community contributed to the survival and well-being of the group. The wetlands surrounding Windover Pond provided abundant opportunities for food gathering. Fish could be caught in nearby waters. Turtles and other aquatic animals offered reliable sources of nutrition. Wild plants supplied fruits, seeds, roots, and other resources throughout the year. Hunting added additional variety to the diet. Success depended on understanding the environment in extraordinary detail. Every season required different strategies. Every resource demanded specialized knowledge. This was not a life of constant desperation. It was a life built upon cooperation. When a child became ill, others helped. When resources were needed, knowledge was shared. When tragedy struck, families came together. Evidence discovered at Windover suggests that social bonds within the community were exceptionally strong. Some individuals survived injuries and physical conditions that would have made independent living difficult. Their survival indicates they received care and support from others. Someone gathered food for them. Someone helped protect them. Someone ensured they remained part of the community. These discoveries reveal something deeply moving. The people of Windover did not simply coexist. They cared for one another. As researchers examined the burials, they found individuals representing every stage of life. Infants rested beside adults. Young children lay near elders who may have watched several generations grow. Mothers, fathers, hunters, gatherers, craftsmen, and community leaders all shared the same sacred resting place beneath the pond. Together, they formed a portrait of an entire society preserved across thousands of years. Each burial carried its own silent story. One infant may have lived only a few months before being mourned by heartbroken parents. An elderly woman may have spent decades passing knowledge to younger generations. A skilled hunter may have provided food for countless families during difficult seasons. A mother may have devoted her life to raising children who would one day become parents themselves. The names of these individuals have been lost forever, yet the evidence of their lives remains. Researchers began noticing that the burials themselves reflected care and intention. Bodies were not discarded casually. They were positioned deliberately. Many were wrapped in woven materials created through significant effort and skill. The rituals surrounding death appear to have carried profound meaning for the community. Families returned to Windover Pond again and again because the location mattered. It connected the living with those who had come before. The more archaeologists learned, the more difficult it became to view the people of Windover as primitive or simplistic. Their lives were rich with relationships, traditions, responsibilities, and cultural practices. They possessed knowledge refined across generations and maintained social structures capable of supporting large family networks over long periods of time. And yet, among all the discoveries emerging from the pond, one category of evidence would reveal even more about who these people truly were. At first glance, it appeared insignificant. Just fragments, pieces of material buried alongside the dead. But those fragments would soon force researchers to reconsider what they thought they knew about the technological abilities of North America's earliest peoples. Because hidden within the peat were objects so extraordinary that many experts struggled to believe their age. And what those discoveries revealed about the people of Windover would prove even more astonishing than the burials themselves. By the time archaeologists had documented dozens of burials at Windover Pond, one question overshadowed every other mystery. The people resting beneath the peat had lived thousands of years ago. Their homes were gone. Their language had disappeared. Their names had vanished from history. Yet one thing remained unmistakably clear. They had chosen this pond for a reason. The evidence pointed to intention at every stage. These were not individuals swept into the water by accident. They were not victims of a sudden catastrophe. They had been brought here deliberately by people who cared deeply about them. Every burial represented a decision. Every placement reflected a tradition. Every layer of peat concealed another chapter in a ritual that endured for centuries. Researchers began to imagine what those ceremonies may have looked like. A family gathers at the edge of the water as the sun sinks low across the wetlands. The air is warm. Insects hum among the reeds. The pond reflects the fading light of evening. Relatives stand together in silence as they prepare to say goodbye to someone they loved. There are no monuments, no stone tombs, and no written prayers. Instead, there is memory, tradition, and a ritual understood by everyone present. The body is carried carefully toward the water. Hands support the weight gently. Voices speak words that have been repeated for generations. Then, with great care, the deceased is lowered beneath the surface. The ripples spread outward. The pond accepts another member of the community. For the people of Windover, this moment may have represented far more than burial. Archaeologists believe the water itself could have held deep symbolic meaning. Throughout human history, water has often been associated with transformation. Rivers separate lands. Oceans connect distant worlds. Springs emerge from hidden places beneath the earth. Across many cultures, water represents passage, renewal, and movement between one state of existence and another. Could the people of Windover have viewed the pond in a similar way? The possibility continues to fascinate researchers. Perhaps the water marked the beginning of a spiritual journey. Perhaps the deceased were believed to travel somewhere beyond the world of the living. Perhaps lowering loved ones into the pond symbolized their transition from one existence to another. Without written records, certainty remains impossible. Yet the consistency of the ritual suggests that the community shared powerful beliefs regarding death and remembrance. Another clue emerged from the remarkable longevity of the practice itself. Windover Pond was not used for a few years. It was not used for a single generation. Families returned to this location for centuries. Think about what that means. Children who attended one burial eventually grew old and were buried in the same pond themselves. Their children followed, then their grandchildren. Generations passed, yet the tradition endured. Such continuity suggests that Windover Pond occupied a special place within the community's understanding of the world. Some researchers believe the pond functioned as a sacred gathering place where the living maintained connections with their ancestors. The dead were not forgotten. They remained part of the community. Every new burial joined those who had come before. Over time, the pond became a resting place not merely for individuals, but for an entire lineage stretching across centuries. This theory gained strength when considering the emotional investment required to maintain the tradition. Families repeatedly returned to the same location because it mattered. They remembered where their ancestors rested. They preserved the ritual. They passed knowledge of the site from one generation to the next. Long before modern maps existed, people knew exactly where to go when it was time to say farewell to a loved one. As excavation continued, archaeologists became increasingly aware that they were not simply uncovering burials. They were investigating a cultural landscape shaped by memory, belief, and tradition. Every discovery offered another clue, yet each answer seemed to generate even more questions. Why did the pond remain sacred for so long? What stories were told about it? What ceremonies accompanied the burials? What did families believe happened after death? The pond itself remained silent. The people who knew the answers had been gone for 8,000 years. So researchers turned their attention to the evidence. If the community left no written explanations, perhaps the burials themselves could reveal the truth. Every artifact was examined. Every burial position was documented. Every surviving fragment was analyzed. Slowly, clues began to emerge from the peat. Then came a discovery that changed the investigation entirely. At first, archaeologists noticed small fragments preserved alongside several bodies. The material appeared fragile and delicate. Many assumed it would prove difficult to identify. Organic materials rarely survive for thousands of years, especially in environments where water is present. Yet these fragments remained surprisingly intact. Researchers collected additional samples. More pieces appeared, then more. Soon it became obvious that what they were looking at was no ordinary material. The fragments had been woven, not randomly, not crudely, skillfully, patiently, with techniques requiring knowledge, practice, and experience. The realization spread quickly through the excavation team. These ancient people had wrapped many of their dead in carefully crafted textiles. For a moment, the significance was difficult to grasp. Then the implications became clear. The fabrics were thousands of years older than many experts believed such craftsmanship should exist in North America. What had begun as a burial mystery was becoming something far larger. The pond was preserving evidence of a society far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. And as researchers examined the woven materials more closely, they realized they were looking at one of the most extraordinary discoveries ever recovered from an ancient American archaeological site. Something nobody expected had been wrapped around the bodies all along, and it was about to rewrite part of human history. The deeper archaeologists excavated at Windover Pond, the more they realized that the ancient community resting beneath the peat was challenging nearly every assumption that had existed about early North American societies. For decades, many people imagined the continent's earliest inhabitants living simple lives with limited technology and few specialized skills. Windover was beginning to tell a very different story. The evidence appeared in fragments. Small pieces at first. A strand of fiber. A woven section preserved beside a burial. A delicate pattern emerging from the dark peat. Individually, each discovery seemed remarkable. Together, they formed one of the most extraordinary collections of ancient textiles ever found in the Americas. As researchers carefully cleaned and examined the material, they found themselves looking at craftsmanship that should not have survived. Organic fibers normally disappear with time. Rain, insects, bacteria, and countless natural processes usually destroy such materials long before archaeologists have any chance of finding them. Yet the unique conditions within Windover Pond had preserved pieces of a lost world. The ancient fabrics emerged from the peat almost like messages from another age. Some showed clear weaving patterns. Others revealed intricate construction techniques. The more scientists studied them, the more astonishing the discoveries became. These were not random bundles of plant fibers. They were not crude attempts at making cloth. They were products of knowledge, skill, experience, traditions passed from one generation to another. The people of Windover understood weaving at a level that surprised even experienced researchers. Imagine the patience required to create such materials. Long before metal tools, long before factories, and long before written instructions, someone sat beside the wetlands gathering plant fibers by hand. Those fibers had to be selected carefully, processed properly, and prepared for weaving. The work demanded time and attention. Mistakes could ruin hours of effort. Success required practice developed over many years. Now imagine teaching those techniques to the next generation. A grandmother showing a young girl how to separate fibers. A mother demonstrating weaving patterns learned from her own parents. Children observing skilled craftsmen and craftswomen as they worked. Knowledge passing quietly from one generation to the next, century after century. The fabrics discovered at Windover Pond suggest exactly this kind of cultural continuity. Some textiles were likely used for practical purposes during daily life. Others may have carried special significance. The fact that many accompanied burials indicates they were important enough to become part of sacred rituals surrounding death. These were not disposable objects. They represented effort, meaning, and perhaps even identity. For archaeologists, the discovery was transformative. Textiles are among the most difficult artifacts to preserve. As a result, entire chapters of human history often disappear because the materials people used every day simply do not survive. Clothing vanishes. Bags disappear. Mats decay. Cordage turns to dust. In most archaeological sites, researchers are left to guess what those items looked like. Windover changed that. For one of the first times, scientists could examine actual woven materials created by people who lived nearly 8,000 years ago. The age of the textiles made the discovery even more remarkable. Many experts had not expected to find evidence of such sophisticated weaving from this period in North American history. Yet there it was, preserved beneath the pond for millennia. The fabrics demonstrated planning, technical knowledge, and craftsmanship far beyond what many had assumed. The implications reached far beyond weaving itself. Textiles require organization. They require specialized knowledge. They require time that can only be devoted to craftsmanship when a society has developed reliable ways of obtaining food and resources. In other words, these fabrics suggested something larger. The people of Windover were not spending every waking moment struggling to survive. They had enough stability to develop skills, enough knowledge to refine techniques, enough continuity to pass expertise across generations. The textiles became evidence of a community with depth, structure, and sophistication. Slowly, a new image of the people of Windover began to emerge. They were skilled artisans, knowledge keepers, parents teaching children, families preserving traditions, communities investing time in craftsmanship that served both practical and ceremonial purposes. The woven fibers recovered from the pond represented more than technology. They represented human creativity. The same creativity that inspires people today. The same desire to make something useful, beautiful, and meaningful. As researchers continued their analysis, they realized that every strand of fiber carried a story. Somewhere in the distant past, someone had gathered the raw material. Someone had prepared it. Someone had woven it into a finished product. Someone had used it. And eventually, someone had chosen to place it beside a loved one during a final farewell at Windover Pond. 8,000 years later, those choices were still visible. The pond had preserved them. The people of Windover had not vanished completely after all. Fragments of their lives remained woven into the archaeological record. Yet astonishing as the textiles were, they did not represent the greatest mystery hidden beneath the peat. Not even close. While researchers celebrated the discovery of some of the oldest and most sophisticated woven materials ever found in North America, another team of scientists was making a far more startling observation. Inside several skulls recovered from the pond, something appeared to have survived that should have disappeared thousands of years earlier. At first, few could believe it. The possibility seemed almost impossible. Laboratory tests were ordered, then additional tests. The results left scientists stunned. Because the ancient waters of Windover Pond had preserved far more than woven fabric. They had preserved something far rarer. Something that would attract worldwide attention and transform Windover from an extraordinary archaeological site into one of the most puzzling scientific mysteries ever discovered in the United States. If the story of Windover Pond had ended with the discovery of ancient burials and remarkable textiles, it would already rank among the most important archaeological finds in American history. But the pond was not finished revealing its secrets. In fact, the discovery that brought international attention to Windover emerged from a question that seemed almost impossible to ask. What if something from the minds of these ancient people had survived? At first, the idea sounded absurd. Human tissue is among the most fragile materials in nature. After death, the body begins a process of decomposition that normally destroys soft tissue relatively quickly. Bones may survive for centuries or even millennia under favorable conditions, but the brain is different. It is delicate. It breaks down rapidly. Archaeologists rarely expect to find any trace of it, especially after thousands of years. Yet as researchers examined several skulls recovered from Windover Pond, they noticed unusual material inside. Initially, there was skepticism. Scientists questioned whether the substance could possibly be what it appeared to be. Additional testing followed. Then more testing. The results stunned everyone involved. Inside a number of the skulls were preserved remnants of ancient human brain tissue. The discovery was extraordinary. Few archaeological sites anywhere in the world had produced anything comparable. The people buried at Windover had rested beneath the peat for nearly 8,000 years, yet traces of their brains remained. It seemed to defy everything researchers thought they knew about preservation. Suddenly, Windover Pond became more than an archaeological site. It became a scientific mystery. Experts from multiple disciplines became interested in the find. Archaeologists, forensic specialists, biologists, and genetic researchers all wanted answers to the same questions. How could this happen? Why here? Why had the tissue survived at Windover when it disappeared at almost every other ancient burial site? The search for answers led investigators back to the unique environment of the pond itself. The waterlogged peat had created unusual chemical conditions. Oxygen levels remained extremely low. Certain microorganisms responsible for decomposition struggled to survive. Over thousands of years, the pond acted almost like a protective vault, shielding fragile organic materials from processes that normally destroy them. Even with that explanation, many questions remained unanswered. Why were some materials preserved better than others? Why did traces survive in certain individuals and not in every burial? Researchers continued their investigation, knowing that the answers might reveal information unavailable anywhere else in North American archaeology. The preserved tissue offered a rare opportunity. For the first time, scientists could attempt analyses that would normally be impossible for remains of this age. Laboratories carefully examined samples. Genetic studies were considered. Researchers searched for clues hidden within the biological remains. Every test represented a chance to learn something new about the people who once gathered beside Windover Pond. The investigation soon expanded beyond preservation itself. Scientists wanted to understand who these people were. Were they closely related to one another? How healthy had they been? What challenges had they faced during their lives? Could traces of family relationships still be identified after 8,000 years? Like detectives piecing together a long-forgotten case, researchers followed every lead. The remains began revealing surprising details. Some individuals showed evidence of injuries that had healed during their lifetimes. Broken bones had mended. Physical conditions that would have limited mobility appeared to have been managed successfully. Such findings suggested that members of the community cared for one another, supporting injured individuals who may have struggled to survive alone. Other remains revealed clues about nutrition and daily life. Researchers could see evidence of diets shaped by the rich wetlands surrounding Windover. The bones preserved traces of years spent living within a landscape abundant with fish, plants, and other natural resources. Then there were the questions of family. Among the more than 100 burials, researchers wondered whether generations of relatives rested side by side beneath the pond. Had mothers been buried near children? Had grandparents joined descendants in the same sacred place? The possibility added another emotional dimension to the story. Imagine the families we have spoken about throughout this journey. The young woman lowered into the pond at dawn. The grieving husband standing nearby. The children watching quietly from the shoreline. The grandparents who had attended countless ceremonies before. What if traces of those relationships could still be detected thousands of years later? What if the pond had preserved not only bodies but fragments of family history itself? The idea captivated researchers. Every new discovery reinforced the same conclusion. The people of Windover were becoming more human with every piece of evidence uncovered. They were no longer distant figures hidden behind the label of prehistory. They were individuals, family members, parents, children, community leaders, craftsmen, storytellers, people whose lives had unfolded beside the waters of ancient Florida. Yet perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the investigation was how much it continued to challenge long-standing assumptions. For generations, Many experts viewed North America's earliest communities through a limited lens. They were often portrayed as small groups focused almost entirely on survival. Windover painted a far richer picture. A society capable of maintaining complex burial traditions. A society skilled in textile production. A society whose members cared for one another. A society sophisticated enough to leave behind evidence still surprising scientists 8,000 years later. And as researchers assembled the growing collection of clues from Windover Pond, they began realizing that the implications extended far beyond a single burial site. The discoveries were forcing archaeologists to reconsider larger questions about the early peoples of North America. Questions about technology. Questions about culture. Questions about social organization. Questions about what these ancient communities were truly capable of achieving. Because the evidence emerging from the pond suggested that parts of American prehistory might need to be rewritten. And the full impact of that realization was only beginning to become clear. As the scientific investigation at Windover Pond continued, researchers discovered that some of the most powerful stories were not hidden within artifacts, textiles, or preserved tissue. They were written in the bones themselves. Silent for 8,000 years, the remains of the people buried beneath the pond began revealing intimate details about lives once lived beside the wetlands of ancient Florida. Bones are remarkable records of human experience. They preserve evidence of hardship. They record injuries. They reveal patterns of health and disease. They carry traces of the challenges people faced and, sometimes, the extraordinary ways they overcame them. For the archaeologists studying Windover, each skeleton became a biography waiting to be read. The process was painstaking. Specialists examined every detail carefully, searching for clues left behind by years of daily life. Small marks could reveal old injuries. Changes in bone structure could indicate long-term health conditions. Signs of wear offered hints about work, movement, and survival. Slowly, individual stories began emerging from the ancient remains. Some of those stories were surprising. Many people assume life 8,000 years ago was short, brutal, and unforgiving. Certainly, the people of Windover faced challenges. They lived without modern medicine. They depended on the natural world for food and resources. Accidents and illnesses could have serious consequences. Yet the evidence revealed something more complicated. Many individuals lived long enough to become respected elders within their community. Some survived injuries that would have required considerable support. Others showed signs of physical limitations that likely made daily tasks more difficult. The remarkable part was not the injuries themselves. The remarkable part was that these people survived them. One individual, for example, displayed evidence of a serious condition that would have reduced mobility over an extended period. Another showed signs of injuries that had healed long before death. In both cases, survival suggests something important. These individuals did not endure their difficulties alone. Someone helped them. Someone gathered food when they could not. Someone offered protection. Someone ensured they remained part of the community. The implications were profound. The people of Windover were not simply focused on individual survival. They invested time and energy in caring for others, even when doing so required effort and sacrifice. This realization transformed how researchers viewed the ancient community. For years, many interpretations of prehistoric societies emphasized competition and constant struggle. Windover revealed another side of human nature: cooperation, compassion, responsibility, the willingness to support vulnerable members of the group. As more remains were studied, additional patterns emerged. Researchers examined evidence related to nutrition and health. The findings suggested that the wetlands surrounding Windover Pond provided access to diverse food sources. Fish, plants, shellfish, and other resources contributed to diets that helped sustain the community over many generations. The people living here understood their environment exceptionally well. They knew when resources were available. They adapted to seasonal changes. They developed strategies that allowed families to thrive in a landscape many outsiders might have considered unpredictable. Even signs of disease contributed valuable information. Some individuals experienced health challenges during their lifetimes, yet many survived long enough for those conditions to leave lasting marks on their bones. Once again, the evidence pointed toward resilience supported by social bonds. Researchers began seeing Windover not merely as a collection of burials, but as a community connected by relationships and mutual support. The young woman from our opening story was no longer an isolated figure. Neither was the grieving husband imagined standing beside the pond, nor the children watching quietly from the shoreline. The archaeological evidence suggested they belonged to something larger, a network of families, a community shaped by shared traditions, a society where people depended upon one another. As forensic specialists reconstructed faces and examined skeletal features, the emotional distance separating modern observers from the people of Windover continued to shrink. The individuals buried beneath the pond stopped feeling like anonymous figures from a remote past. Instead, they became recognizable as fellow human beings. Parents concerned about their children, children learning from their elders, families celebrating good seasons and enduring difficult ones together, people facing illness, injury, aging, and loss, people finding ways to continue. In many respects, the story was timeless. The more scientists learned, the clearer it became that the greatest discovery at Windover Pond was not a single artifact or scientific breakthrough. It was the realization that human connection has deep roots stretching far into the past. 8,000 years ago, long before cities, long before written history in North America, people were caring for one another in ways that remain deeply familiar today. When a member of the community suffered an injury, others stepped forward. When age made life more difficult, support remained available. When death came, families gathered beside the pond to honor loved ones with dignity and care. Those actions left traces, not written in words, written in bones, written in burial traditions, written in evidence that survived where everything else disappeared. And perhaps that is why Windover Pond continues to captivate researchers decades after its discovery. The site does more than reveal how ancient people lived. It reveals how they treated one another. Yet as powerful as these discoveries were, archaeologists increasingly recognized that Windover's significance extended beyond the lives of the individuals buried there. The evidence was beginning to challenge much larger assumptions about the earliest peoples of North America. For generations, history had told one story. Windover Pond was telling another. And what emerged from the dark waters of that ancient burial site would force researchers to rethink an entire chapter of American prehistory. By the time researchers completed years of excavation and analysis at Windover Pond, a remarkable realization had emerged. The site was far more than an ancient cemetery. It was far more than a collection of artifacts preserved by unusual environmental conditions. Windover had become something much larger. It had become a challenge to the way many people understood the earliest chapters of American history. For generations, a simplified image dominated discussions about North America's ancient past. Early communities were often portrayed as small groups moving constantly across the landscape, focused almost entirely on immediate survival. Their lives were frequently described in basic terms, with little emphasis placed on cultural complexity, technological innovation, or long-term traditions. Windover Pond told a different story. The evidence accumulated piece by piece. First came the burials, then the textiles, then the preserved biological remains, then the clues hidden within the bones. Individually, each discovery was significant. Together, they revealed a society far more sophisticated than many had imagined. Consider the burial practices alone. For centuries, families returned to the same sacred pond to honor their dead. Such consistency required cultural continuity. Traditions had to be remembered and passed from one generation to the next. Knowledge of the site had to be preserved. Rituals had to be taught. The community maintained those practices for hundreds of years, creating a connection between past and present that endured across countless lifetimes. Then there were the textiles. The woven materials recovered from Windover Pond demonstrated technical abilities that surprised researchers around the world. These fabrics were not accidental creations. They reflected specialized knowledge, careful craftsmanship, and a deep understanding of materials. Someone had spent years mastering those skills. Others had learned from them. The techniques survived because knowledge was actively preserved and shared. Such discoveries force us to reconsider old assumptions. A society capable of producing sophisticated textiles is not merely reacting to its environment. It is innovating. It is teaching. It is creating. It is investing time in activities that extend beyond basic survival. The same pattern appears throughout the evidence recovered from Windover. The care shown to injured individuals suggests social responsibility and cooperation. The burial traditions suggest complex beliefs surrounding death and remembrance. The successful adaptation to the wetlands demonstrates an extraordinary understanding of the natural world. Again and again, the archaeological record points toward a thriving community built upon relationships, knowledge, and tradition. The people of Windover were not wandering aimlessly through an untamed landscape. They were members of a culture with its own customs, its own values, its own ways of understanding life and death. A culture that flourished thousands of years before the construction of the pyramids of Egypt had even begun. That realization alone is enough to transform how we think about early America. Too often, the ancient peoples of North America are viewed through the lens of what they did not leave behind. They built no massive stone cities that survived into the modern era. They left no written histories explaining their achievements. As a result, entire chapters of their story have often remained overlooked. Windover reminds us that complexity does not always leave monumental architecture behind. Sometimes it survives in woven fibers. Sometimes it survives in burial rituals. Sometimes it survives in the evidence of compassion written into ancient bones. And sometimes it survives beneath a forgotten pond, waiting thousands of years for someone to uncover it. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Windover is how much remains unknown. Even after decades of study, researchers continue debating questions that may never be fully answered. Why was the pond chosen in the first place? What stories were told beside its waters? What beliefs guided the burial ceremonies? What did the community think happened after death? The people who knew those answers are gone. Their voices have faded into history. Yet the clues they left behind continue to inspire new questions. And those questions extend far beyond Windover Pond itself. Because if one construction project near Titusville accidentally uncovered a site of such extraordinary significance, what else remains hidden? How many ancient communities lived, thrived, and disappeared without leaving obvious traces behind? How many sacred places lie buried beneath forests, wetlands, fields, and modern cities? How many forgotten chapters of American history are still waiting beneath the landscape? Windover Pond may be one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries ever made in the United States. But perhaps its greatest lesson is this: the story of early America is far from complete. The people resting beneath the waters of that ancient pond have already changed what we know about the past. Yet somewhere beneath the vast landscapes of North America, other secrets may still be waiting. Other stories, other communities, other forgotten worlds. And perhaps, hidden beneath water, soil, and centuries of silence, there are more Windovers waiting to be found. As our journey through Windover Pond draws to a close, it is worth returning to the beginning of the story. To that quiet morning nearly 8,000 years ago. To the family standing at the edge of the water. To the young woman wrapped carefully in woven fabric. To the loved ones gathered beside the pond as they prepared to say goodbye. For them, it was a deeply personal moment. They were not creating a mystery for future archaeologists. They were not trying to leave evidence for scientists. They were simply honoring someone they loved. Like countless families before them and countless families after them, they faced one of life's most difficult experiences. They mourned. They remembered. They held on to the traditions passed down by generations who had stood in the same place before them. Then they returned to their lives. The children grew older. New families formed. The seasons continued their endless cycle. And the pond remained. Quiet, patient, watching over those entrusted to its waters. Over the centuries, the world changed beyond anything the people of Windover could have imagined. Forests shifted. Shorelines moved. New cultures emerged. Entire civilizations rose and fell across distant continents. Empires appeared, flourished, and disappeared into history. Yet beneath the dark peat of a Florida wetland, the people of Windover remained undisturbed. Their homes vanished long ago. The pathways they walked disappeared beneath changing landscapes. The stories they told around evening fires faded from memory. The names spoken by parents to their children were lost to time. Their language became silent. Their songs were forgotten. Their world slowly slipped beyond the reach of history. And yet, somehow, part of their story survived. A woven textile. A carefully arranged burial. a healed injury preserved within bone, a fragment of ancient tissue protected by the waters of the pond. Each discovery became a small voice reaching across 8,000 years. Not a voice speaking in words, but a voice speaking through evidence, through craftsmanship, through care, through tradition, through the simple proof that these people lived meaningful lives and mattered deeply to one another. Perhaps that is what makes Windover Pond so moving. The site reminds us that history is not only the story of kings, empires, and monuments. It is also the story of ordinary people whose lives were every bit as important to them as our lives are to us. Parents hoping their children would thrive, elders passing on knowledge, families gathering together during moments of joy and moments of grief. The people of Windover may never have imagined that anyone would remember them thousands of years in the future. Yet here we are, listening to their story, learning from their lives, trying to understand the world they left behind, and perhaps recognizing something familiar within it. As evening settles once more across the Florida wetlands, the pond returns to the same quiet stillness that has defined it for thousands of years. The waters move gently through the reeds. Night birds call across the marsh. Stars slowly appear overhead, just as they did for the families who once gathered along these shores. The mysteries of Windover Pond are not fully solved. Some questions may never be answered, but perhaps that is part of what makes the site so remarkable. It invites us to wonder, to imagine, to remember that countless human stories remain hidden beneath the surface of history, stories waiting patiently to be rediscovered. And tonight, as the wetlands settle once more into silence, the ancient people of Windover remain where they have rested for 8,000 years. The families who gathered beside Windover Pond never imagined their world would survive into ours. Their voices are gone. Their homes have vanished. But beneath the still waters of a Florida marsh, fragments of their story endured. And now, after thousands of years, those fragments have spoken once more. The pond grows quiet. The stars continue their slow journey across the sky. The water reflects the darkness above. And beneath that dark water, the people of Windover continue their long rest, guarded by the same wetlands that preserved their memory across the ages. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of America's most extraordinary archaeological mysteries. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to leave a comment and share where you're watching from. I'd love to hear which discovery surprised you the most. And if you're fascinated by forgotten civilizations, ancient mysteries, and the hidden stories of our past, be sure to subscribe and join us for